Let's talk a little bit about the differences between a traditional church, a congregation that you may be in now or that you may be aware of in past generations. What's the difference between a traditional church and a small group or a life group type of atmosphere? Well, first off, you have a traditional church that may be building centered versus a small group congregation that is people centered. Now, remember, we want to avoid the idea of cocooning. I think there's been growth in the social networking type of relationships that people have done. I know texting, phone calls have come a long, long way, and these are good things and ways that we can communicate. But I think there's also a movement of people staying at home more and going out into other congregations or visitations or being involved in the community as much as I've seen in the past. So this idea of cocooning is something you want to combat with a church that is involved in small groups and purposeful of coming together for a reason. Now, there have been a lot of social groups that have grown. I know the Philippines have many, many social groups, not only in schools where you have a lot of clubs and events, but also in the community. You may have sports activities or religious gatherings or birthday parties. I know there's a lot of opportunities to develop social groups. And this is what the church can help do. They can help provide a social group to where people can commune together. Now, if you had a building like a traditional church, it kind of limits things to that building. But if you have a small group, you can go anywhere. You can meet anywhere at any time, and it really frees that side of worship. Now let's look at how it's Sunday centered in a traditional church versus a small group. It's everyday centered. And it's about an interaction and discussion. If it's Sunday centered, you may have some people think that they're good to go. All they have to do is just worship on Sunday and they're done for the week. But in a small group setting, you can visit with people and are in contact with them and develop a relationship, and you become friends the entire week, not just one day. If Sister Joe needs something or needs some help, or Brother Dodong has a request, he knows somebody to get in hold of. He has a friend, and you can do this each day of the week or different times of the week. Another thing is that a traditional church may be preacher-centered, whereas a small group is member-centered. Now, it's not bad to have a preacher that preaches on Sunday. I think this is needed in every congregation, but that shouldn't be the sole focus. It should not just be you show up, one man teaches an audience, everyone's kind of pointing in the same direction, listening, and then afterwards people just go home. I think there's a place for that. I think there's a need for that. Because with a membered congregation or a membered, like a life group where it's member center, you have the preaching, you have that edification and that accountability, but you also can apply it to people through a dialogue. Okay, so it's important for people to be able to bounce their ideas, their comments, their questions in an environment that is welcoming to that kind of communication. Think of being shepherded by a list in a traditional church against being shepherded face to face. Now, if you have shepherds or elders in your congregation, that is so, so important. And they need to have that ability to ensure that their members are cared for. If you have men of the congregation who are leading and ensuring that people have learned and have the tools that they need to be faithful Christians, it's reassuring to them that they don't have to make the calls and call everybody in a congregation. They don't have to be accountable to talk to each person. Why? Because a life group can provide that and can help care for each other. And then one member can report it to the leaders or the men. And this is an accountability that you can have that puts less strain on those in charge and more enlightening to the whole congregation. And another one is that the staff does the work versus the staff trains, models, and empowers members to do the work. So you don't want a congregation to be one or two people doing all the work. You want to kind of disseminate some of the responsibilities to a lot of the members. In a traditional church, you don't have that ability many, many times. And I find that when a church is member driven, there's a life group that edifies one another, that communicates with one another, and if a need arises, they're much more likely to volunteer for something that is, for their group. I think you'll have more people step up. And this is very, very important to help alleviate some of the strains and pressures that one or two people in the congregation may be overwhelmed with. Now, the church I've attended here in the States, we've been very, very active with small groups. And if you were to come to our congregation and ask, what kind of church are you? We would tell you that we are a small group church. We are purposeful with our life groups, and we really want to plug you in to a life group. If you ask, what is your biggest ministry? It's our life group. If you were to say, how can I get plugged into the church? I would plug you into a life group, and you can then commune with those people and grow your faith and share your faith with them. So you can tell how a congregation can identify themselves with this ministry and then project that to their surrounding community, which I think is very, very good. An example is when a couple got married in a congregation. They didn't have any money. They didn't have any way to pay for a ceremony or didn't have very many friends to help with it. However, the life group that they were involved in, they stepped up and they helped provide a lot of the expenses and organization for their wedding. And of course, they were one of the main parts of the wedding ceremony as well. So I'm not saying this happens to every life group, but I'm saying in the congregation, there's no wedding program that was designed to find people who wanted to get married and help them in that endeavor. Instead, the life group took care of it. Another example is when a member of the church didn't have any transportation to get to their congregation based upon some issues that they were having. They called a member of the life group, picked them up, and was able to attend worship service. The congregation didn't have a transportation program. This is just people loving on each other and relationships being built because they had an opportunity to get connected with the life group that otherwise they wouldn't be able to get connected to. I've noticed that if there's a visitor to a congregation, it is tough for that visitor to get plugged in unless they know somebody. And just being added to a small group is a way for them to do that. Understanding what a life group is. My personal definition is a Christian small group is an intentional face-to-face gathering of 5 to 15 people on a regular time schedule with the common purpose of growing in Christ, encouraging one another, and reaching out to non-members. That definition is purposeful because first, a small group is intentional. It's not a mistake. It's not something that's convenient or happens accidentally. It has to be thought out. It has to be done well and with good intention. I think a big thing is that the members of a small group have to want to be in it. They have to have this level of commitment that they will attend. And I don't know if this is something you would need to get in writing, but it needs to be intentional and purposeful and not just okay, I'll try it out, but okay, I will commit to joining this group for this next year and be involved as much as I can. Now, it's not binding. You don't have to be there all the time, but there is a level of commitment that you need for this small group to be successful. I know of a small group that had a list of people that wanted to be in a group, and they decided to start assigning people. They thought it'd be good to have a variety of different ages and different backgrounds. So they put an older person in the group, they put a younger person in the group, and it worked okay, but it didn't last because the thought is if the member does not quite want to be at the small group, it's not going to be successful. But when you have buy-in, when the member says, I want to join this group because I know these people or I want to be involved in these people, there's that buy-in, and it really solidifies the group, helps them unite, and build those relationships. The number 5 to 15 is very important. Once you get over about 12 people, it's tough to maintain that amount of people. It's almost like two groups if you get 15 people or more. And you want to be able to manage people relatively easy instead of just starting to get 15, 20 people. That's pretty much a small congregation. So you want 5 to 15, anywhere in there is a good number for small groups, especially if you're starting out. In general, the smaller the group is, the more open people are. I remember thinking when I had just a few people attend one of my small groups, I think we had maybe 4 people. I was kind of thinking, well, that stinks because I wanted more people to be involved. But yet it was that meeting where I bonded the most because it was just us. So don't think because you don't have a large group it won't be successful. Bonding happens, the smaller the group, the better many, many times. Of course, if you get larger than 15, that's actually a good problem to have. You want to split and make 2 smaller groups to stay within that range. Next, the meeting must be regular. I think the easiest way to kill a group is to not meet regularly. If there's a time when only a couple members can show one week, the temptation is just to say, well, let's just not meet. Let's meet next week. And if you miss a couple of weeks in a row, it's very difficult to get everybody back together again. If you have 6 members and 3 members say, we won't be able to meet this week, and there's another couple members who really, really wanted to meet. They looked forward to it. They had a lot of things they wanted to share. But because of those 3 people who weren't able to make it, you say to the other people that really wanted to come, hey, we're not meeting this week. Well, that can be discouraging for those people. They really might have needed that meeting to bond and to have that relationship and fellowship. So try not to cancel meetings and meet regularly, because the fastest way to kill a small group is just to skip a few meetings. The next thing you know, you're not meeting at all. You have to have a common purpose. A life group must have a clear message. If the life group wants to meet and discuss the Sunday morning lesson and talk about how they can apply it to their lives, that's great. That is their purpose. If a small group meeting is to come up with a topic on their own and meet and discuss that, that's great. Perhaps they can meet together just to sing together or to encourage one another in different ways. That's fine. It's just you need to be purposeful with the reason for coming together, because it could be discouraging if you have a meeting where there isn't purpose. There's no meat, because people may not want to come because they don't get anything out of it. So there may be times when you have a small group meeting that's just singing or just writing cards to people or just coming together to enjoy an activity together. And that's okay. But on the main premise of what small groups are, there needs to be that purpose that everybody agrees on and wants, so that there's meat given every week. Accountability and encouragement. Small groups are a place you can be encouraged to grow and study your Bible. So a member will want to study their Bible in order to discuss it at small group. So if you can be purposeful with encouraging your group to read their Bible, to come prepared, I think you'll have better buy-in by each member, knowing, oh, I need to read the passage before I get there so that I can be able to discuss it and be involved in the group, instead of just saying, oh, I'll just attend and whatever happens, happens. If you have buy-in with being purposeful about encouraging one another in the Word, I think that in the long run, you have a lot more people knowing more, learning more, and wanting to dig into the Word. And then, of course, inviting other people to join your life group. A life group is about people. It's about encouraging one another, but also reaching to the lost and those that need to be saved. So it's an atmosphere that should condone bringing people who don't know God or may have questions about it or are just neighbors. That way you can start your outreach, you can start evangelizing and rubbing shoulders with people that you want to witness to about God. It's easy to kind of have your cluster of friends in one congregation. In the States, we call it a clique, where you just kind of connect with a certain amount of people and you don't really visit with some of the other members. It's important to avoid this and be purposeful about it. You need to invite others as if they are a part of your clique. And if you are if you talk about that from the very beginning, people will be more willing to invite people and be accepting of those outsiders. I remember a small group that from the beginning prayed about the visitor that they wanted to reach out to. Now, they didn't have any visitors yet, but they were very purposeful with praying for that person, and they actually had an empty chair in the group, and they would sit in a circle and they would pray for that empty chair at the end of the service, and they said, we pray for the person that's going to come and sit in this chair because this is an evangelistic tool, and we want to reach those that don't know Christ and don't know God. So they would pray over the empty chair, and they would be purposeful with inviting people outside the church to come in. So we talked about what a life group is, but let's talk a little bit about what a life group leader is and does. A leader is not always a good preacher or someone who has great experience with teaching a Bible class. It's not like a scholar is required in order to be a life group leader. Some of the best life group leaders are the ones who don't spend too much time analyzing the Bible and the scriptures, but who know how to communicate with others and how to, shall we say, share the mic with their group. So a good leader for a small group isn't necessarily one that can just talk for an hour, right? There is a place for that, and I think that's important. But remember, what is the purpose of a life group? To communicate with others, to have that dialogue with other people. So a good life group leader must have the skills needed to bring out some of the shy people to help them communicate as well. A leader is an encourager to others. So this isn't a quiet person who kind of sits back and looks at the list that he has and just kind of goes on down the list of things to do or talk about. This is someone who wants to be engaged and wants to encourage people. The purpose of a leader is to tell people they had good comment, that they appreciate their participation, and they encourage them to do so again. This makes people feel comfortable, excited to participate, because the leader isn't too focused on some of the scholarly things of the Word. So don't worry about not knowing everything there is to know about the Bible. You don't have to be the best Bible teacher ever, but you do need to be able to instigate some discussion, and I think that's important. Remember, if you don't have the answer to somebody's question, that is not a problem. You can always say, I'll get back to you as a leader, and then follow up with them the next week. You can then talk to a preacher, someone who is knowledgeable in that subject, and find out the answer, or research for yourself. So this is a way to answer questions specifically, but you don't have to know everything beforehand. Remember, a leader is a shepherd. Someone who knows the sheep, can minister to them, or bring the concern to the men to the congregation. So you're kind of the eyes to the leadership of the congregation. A good leader knows how to take an issue that may not be able to be dealt with in that level, bring the issue up to the leaders of the church, and have it addressed. I think that's important for a leader. A good leader is one who can plan to have a good meeting. Now, not every meeting needs to be this great, grand meeting that is just awesome all the time. But it needs to be good. So here's what I mean by that. It doesn't have to be time consuming, but a leader needs to contact his group members. He needs to talk to them some way during the week and encourage them to come to the weekly life group session. This helps with accountability because when someone is expecting you to come, you're more likely to go. I like to refer to a good life group leader using a 30-30 concept. This is where 30 minutes is used to contact people during any given week, and the other 30 minutes is to prepare a lesson. A leader should put in about 30 minutes into a good discussion topic for the week. This doesn't mean it dictates what the hour is, but it allows some of that dead time to be done away with because there is something prepared to talk about if no one brings anything up. So a leader isn't one that says, this is what we're going to talk about regardless of the feeling of the group. A leader is like, if we don't have anything to talk about, we can talk about these, or we can talk about the issues at hand that we want to bring up as a group. Now, I always think it's good as a life group leader to kind of take a step back and think about what are my good qualities as a life group leader, and what are some of the qualities that I think are weaknesses and that I can improve on. If you kind of understand yourself, I'm maybe a quiet person and I'm not strong in instigating discussion. That's something you can work on. You can talk to other group leaders and learn from that. I think if you know about it, you can address it. Or maybe your strengths are to know the word very, very well, and maybe you talk a lot. Well, realize that it's not all about the leader. It should be about the members and the people there. So it's great to kind of bounce off your knowledge, but remember you shouldn't be talking the whole time. So understand your weaknesses and strengths. Talk about those in your congregation and be purposeful with trying to learn and improve on that throughout the year.